This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Hone, and in this video I'm continuing with my Edge of Eternities limited set review. I've already looked at all the multicolored and colorless cards, and in this video we're looking at all the white ones. For each of these cards, I'll discuss how I think they'll perform in limited, that means draft and sealed, and I'll punctuate each evaluation with a letter grade. If you're new to my set reviews and unsure of what my letter grades mean, you can find a guide in the description for this video. There are some important things to keep in mind as I review each of these cards. First, because we're only talking about draft and sealed, I'm only going to be talking about cards that can be found in play boosters. And I'm also only talking about cards that are in the main set. Later on, I'll be taking a look at all of the special guests and bonus sheet cards. These are also my evaluations of these cards before it's possible to even play the new format, because my goal is to have the set review ready for you in time for the pre-release, and that means I'll be wrong about some stuff, but as the format comes into focus, I'll do videos talking about how the format is panned out. Lastly, I want to let you know that there are some set review related perks for being a channel member or a patron. You get access to my ongoing set notes during preview season, and you'll also get a spreadsheet with all of my grades once the set review is complete. If those perks interest you, check out the description, where you can find out how to support the channel using one of those methods. Alright, without further ado, let's dive in with a look at all the white cards in Edge of Eternities. First up, we have All Fate's Stalker, which for 3 generic and a white is a 2/3 Drix Assassin at uncommon. When it enters, you exile up to 1 target non-assassin creature until this creature leaves the battlefield, and it also has Warp for 1 generic and a white. This is an alternate casting cost, and if you cast it that way, you exile it at the beginning of the next end step, and then you can cast it from exile on a later turn. This looks really good, and it has a cool design too. When you warp it, you're more frequently going to use it to blink your own creature for value, though sometimes you'll be able to use it to permanently get rid of a token or get a blocker out of the way that your opponent has. But then, when you cast it normally, it's going to be a really good card like all Banisher Priest-like creatures are. Adding to the board and removing something is just an incredible play in every limited format, and this is more flexible than most versions of this effect because of the blink upside. This looks like a B+ to me, and it's in the conversation for being white's best uncommon. Next, let's look at Esteli Reclaimer, which for 3 generic and 2 white is a 5/4 Angel Warrior at rare. It's got flying, and when it enters, you return target non-creature, non-land permanent card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this creature, and it has Warp for 2 generic and a white. So a 5 mana 5/4 flyer is already a pretty solid card in limited, and this can give you its trigger twice thanks to Warp. Now, it is pretty restrictive because it only looks at non-creatures, non-lands, and they need to be mana value X or less. And you're just not always going to have something that you can get back, especially when you warp it. But when you cast it normally, a few turns later, you are more likely to get something back. The thing that I see this working with the most frequently and the most effectively is probably Spacecraft, because they're not creatures, but they can become creatures. But the fact is, you're not going to have that many things you can get back with this ability, so a lot of what you're getting is just a 5 mana 5/4 flyer. It is worth remembering that Warp works nicely with Spacecraft in general, because that means you can warp this into play and tap it to put 5 charge counters on one of your Spacecraft, which is going to help it become a creature more quickly. This looks like a pretty good card to me, but it's not a bomb or anything. I'm giving it a B. Next up, it's Auxiliary Boosters, which for 4 generic and a white is a common artifact equipment. When it enters, you create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token and attach this equipment to it. The equipped creature gets +1/+2 and has flying, and this has equipped for 3 generic. The baseline here is a 5 mana 3/4 flyer that gives you 2 artifacts, and that's a pretty solid card in this format. With an equip cost of 3, it won't even feel terrible to equip this to other stuff either later in the game, as it's a buff that can make a significant difference. This looks like a pretty nice common for white. It just does a lot of little stuff that I think adds up to a quality card, giving it a C+. Next up, it's Banishing Light, which for 2 generic and a white is a common enchantment, and when it enters, you exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. So this is a card that is always good removal because it can hit any non-land permanent. It doesn't always feel super efficient these days as we have more and more creatures with enters, triggers, and stuff like that, and they get a lot of value out of those, so spending 3 at sorcery speed to kill something isn't always great, but the flexibility really helps overcome that. It's always at least a C+ when we see it. It can be better, but it's usually better in sets that have an enchantment theme, and there's a very small one in this format. Not really enough of one for it to get like a big bump, and I think it falls a little short of being premium just because it's a lot clunkier these days than it used to be. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Beyond the Quiet, which for 3 generic and 2 white is a rare sorcery that exiles all creatures and spacecraft. Sweepers are always pretty awkward and limited, as most games just don't play out in such a way that your opponent is the only one who gets destroyed by this kind of card. Still, a card like this is strong. It can pull you back ahead from being behind in a way that few cards can, but it's pretty bad when you're ahead or at parity when it's kind of a blank card. So, like most 5+ mana sweepers that don't do anything else but exile and destroy stuff, I think it's probably a C+. Next up, it's Bright Spear Zealot, which for 2 generic and a white is a 2/4 human soldier at common. It's got vigilance, and it gets +2/+0 as long as you've cast 2 or more spells this turn. A 3 mana 2/4 with vigilance is honestly a pretty solid card, and this will sometimes be a more impressive 4/4, and you'll be able to do that at instant speed on occasion, which is pretty sweet. It does have a couple of weird things going on in this set with regard to spacecraft. One of them is that the red-white theme is about having tapped creatures, and you can do that by stationing spacecraft, but you can also do it by attacking. This guy can't, because he has vigilance. So it's a little bit of a non-bo with cards that pay you off for having tapped stuff, except that it's also good with spacecraft because you can attack with it and then also station in the same turn, which not that many cards in the set can do. So this looks like a nice common to me. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Cosmogrand Zenith, which for 2 generic and a white is a 2/4 human soldier at Mythic Rare. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, choose one, create 2 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. These triggers are both amazing. You'll make the tokens when you need bodies, and if you've already gone wide, you'll be thrilled with the counters. Double spelling is far from automatic, but cheap warp costs in this set do make it easier than it would be in most, and just waiting until you have a turn where you can play this and a second spell can ensure you get amazing value right away, so even if your opponent untaps and kills Cosmogrand Zenith, you're already ahead, and if they don't kill it, you can usually snowball your way to victory. Throw in the solid stats, and I think we have a card that will help you run away with a lot of games, and deliver you good fail case value too, giving it an A-. Next up, it's Dawnstrike Vanguard, which for 5 generic and a white is a 4/5 human knight at uncommon. It's got lifelink, and at the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control other than this creature. So here is one of those payouts for having tapped creatures. And it's a pretty strong one. Buffing your entire board except for this permanently is a big deal. And on turns where you can cast this and almost make this feel like an interest trigger, it's going to feel pretty insane. But there are going to be times where you can't do it, and when this is just a 6 mana 4/5 lifelink, it isn't very impressive, but the set is set up in such a way that it's very possible to trigger this once, and even just triggering it once is going to be very powerful and make you feel pretty good about things. And putting those counters on your creatures means it's more likely you can attack effectively with them and trigger it again on the next turn. So overall, I think this does deliver the kind of value you need out of a 6 mana card. It's not going to do it consistently enough to be great, but I do think it's a C+. Next up, it's Dockworker Drone, which for 1 generic and a white is a 1/1 artifact creature robot at common. It enters with a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, you put its counters on target creature you control. This is a solid 2-drop. It works nicely in the +1/+1 counter decks, as well as the artifact decks, and sometimes you'll be able to do something sweet with the counters when it dies, giving it a C. Next up, it's Dual Sun Adepts, which for 2 generic and a white is a 2/2 human soldier at uncommon. It's got double strike, and you can pay 5 generic to give creatures you control +1/+1 until end of turn. The 3 mana 2/2 stat line can be rough, because removal for 1 mana can often take these things down, and there is more than one way to do that at common and uncommon in this format. And that is a big risk, but I think the reward is worth it in this case. A 3 mana 2/2 double striker is at least pretty good at blocking. Like, your opponent can't attack into this 3 mana 2/2 like they can most. And this kind of pump effect being on a creature that's already solid, we've seen it perform well in countless formats at this point, and this is another one that I think gets there. Obviously, buffing itself is a huge deal too because it has double strike, so I think this overcomes the problem of the Grey Ogre stat line, and I'm giving it a B-. Next up, it's Dual Sun Technique, which for 1 generic and a white is an uncommon instant. Target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. If it had a +1/+1 counter on it, draw a card. Double strike is pretty nice for a trick, though it's less good on really small creatures than actual stats boosts are. It does still manage to win you most combats, and you can sometimes do lethal out of nowhere. The times where you draw a card with this will feel completely absurd because it probably means you get a 2-for-1, but this also isn't the kind of trick that's useful against removal in any way, shape, or form, and that limits how great it can be in Limited. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Emergency Eject, which for 2 generic and a white is an uncommon instant. It says destroy target non-land permanent, its controller creates a lander token. This is an artifact with 2 generic, tap, sacrifice this token, and search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So white actually has 2 flexible non-land removal spells in this set between Banishing Light and this, which is interesting. This one's an instant, unlike Banishing Light, but it also gives your opponent a card back. Don't underestimate how significant that is, as you could help them fix and ramp their mana, help them with artifact synergies, help them with the void mechanic, the list goes on. These landers are really good, and giving your opponent one definitely isn't good. That said, it does become less of a problem later in the game, and hitting any non-land for 3 is definitely a big deal at instant speed. You do still kind of 2-for-1 yourself, but this is better than cards like Stroke of Midnight, which give your opponent a 1/1 token instead, because at least you can get like a blocker out of the way and attack without having to worry about a new token being in the way. So I think this is solid removal. It's definitely not great. Giving your opponent a lander is a massive downside, but I think it's a C because it can deal with so many things at instant speed. Next up, it's Exalted Sunborn, which for 3 generic and 2 white is a mythic rare angel wizard. It's a 4/5 with flying and lifelink, and if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead, and it has warp for 1 generic and a white. So this would be good even without warp, and that's good because warping it isn't going to be meaningful most of the time in limited, because you have to have the mana to warp, and then you need to make tokens in the same turn, and that's going to be hard to achieve. It's not impossible, but generally just playing a 5 mana 4/5 flying lifelink by the time you can warp this and put tokens into play is just going to be better than going the other route, because this stat line is really good. I think this is going to make more tokens once you play it on turn 5 and it does some damage, and then you get a couple of lander tokens or robot tokens or whatever later in the game. Mostly, though, this is a 5 mana 4/5 flying lifelink, which is a really good card, and occasionally it'll really go off. I'm giving it a B+. Next up, it's Exosuit Savior, which for 2 generic and a white is a 2/2 human soldier at common with flying. When it enters, you return up to 1 target permanent you control to its owner's hand. Windrake stat lines aren't great, and this kind of upside is often too narrow, especially at sorcery speed, to be worthwhile. There are some cute things you can do with it in this set, beyond the usual rebuying an enters trigger or whatever. Like, you can return something that's stationed, and then if you have the mana to cast it, you can cast it, and then station with it again. It also works with the void mechanic, but overall, this is a badly statted creature with too narrow of upside to be a card that makes the cut regularly, giving it a D+. Next up, it's Flight Deck Coordinator, which for 2 generic and a white is a 3/3 human soldier at common. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, you gain 2 life. This has an okay stat line, but the you have stuff tap trigger here is fairly underwhelming. Triggering this kind of thing multiple times is likely to be challenging, and that's what you need to do for this card to really feel worth it. And even then, it's not amazing. I'm giving it a C-. Next up, it's Focus Fire, which for 1 white mana is a common instant that does X damage to target attacking or blocking creature, where X is 2, plus the number of creatures and or spacecraft you control. This is restrictive, since it can only hit attackers and blockers, and that means that for aggro decks, the fact that you can't get a blocker out of the way with it is a pretty big bummer. But for only 1 mana, this can do a ton in terms of trading up, and can often take down sizable creatures. I don't think it's premium, it needs way too much setup and is too narrow, but it's hard not to like this card when it only costs a single mana. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Halia, Guided by Light, which for 2 generic and a white is a 3/3 legendary human soldier at rare. When she or another creature or artifact you control enters, you gain 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card if you've gained 3 or more life this turn, and she has warp for 1 white mana. So even if she just had the first ability, she'd be a good card, as solid stats plus lots of incidental life gain is a good place to be. And she'll draw you a card every now and then. I wouldn't count on it a lot. It's not that easy to gain 3 life in a turn off of her triggers alone. You're going to need some other life gain around to really pull it off. And it's doable, but it does take some work. She's not the kind of life gain card draw engine that can do it all on her own. She's going to need a little bit of help. And the fact that you can warp her early and gain a bit of life and maybe even draw a card if you have the opening to do so is pretty sweet. I'm giving this a B. Next up, it's Hardlight Containment, which for 1 white mana is a rare enchantment aura with enchant artifact you control. When it enters, you exile target creature an opponent controls until this aura leaves the battlefield, and the enchanted permanent has ward 1. So even in this set, you're not always going to have an artifact, but when you do, this isn't too far off from Swords to Plowshares. I mean, sure, your opponent can get their thing back by blowing up whatever you put it on, and that'll hurt, but Ward makes that a little bit more difficult, and doing something like putting this on a lander seems kind of funny, because at least then you don't get 2 for 1 when they destroy it. This isn't quite as good as something like Sheltered by Ghosts, which also gave the thing you put it on +1/+0 and lifelink, which allowed you to get in with a hit that would gain you some life, giving you even more immediate value. And this is also more narrow, only capable of going on artifacts and not on creatures. But I do think it's an apt comparison. They're going to work similarly, and I think that makes this a B-. Next up, it's Honor, which for 1 white mana is an uncommon sorcery. You put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and draw a card. I think this is sneaky good. A counter isn't quite worth a card, but you end up paying 1 mana for significantly more than a card worth of value here, and it synergizes nicely with +1/+1 counter stuff in the set. Improving your board and drawing a card is a good feeling. It can help you double spell too. I'm giving this a C+. Next up, it's Honored Knight Captain, which for 1 generic and a white is a 1/1 human advisor knight at uncommon. When it enters, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and you can pay 4 generic and 2 white and sacrifice it to search your library for an equipment card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. I'm already signing up for a 2 mana 1/1 that makes another 1/1. We see that kind of card a lot, and it's always a good 2-drop. Good when you drop it on turn 2, but good at any other point in the game as well, because 2 bodies significantly alter how combat's going to go for your opponent on their next turn. So throw in the fact that you can cheat an equipment onto the battlefield and at instant speed, and you have a card that stays really relevant all game long, and one that has a great baseline. Searching up that 3/4 flyer equipment is going to be particularly nice, and a combo you see a lot because it's a common. I'm giving this a B-. Next up, it's Knight Luminary, which for 3 generic and a white is a 3/2 human knight at common, and when it enters, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and it has Warp for 1 generic and a white. This is a pretty good common. I'm already in for this card without Warp. It would be like a C, if that's all it was. But with Warp, well, you have a card that fills 2 separate slots on the curve, and helps you go wide, and gives you 3 total bodies. That sounds pretty good to me. I'm starting this at a C+, and I could see it going higher. Next up, it's Lightstall Inquisitor, which for 1 white mana is a 2/1 Angel Wizard at rare. It's got Vigilance, and when it enters, each opponent exiles a card from their hand and may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Each spell cast this way costs 1 generic more to cast, and each land played this way enters tapped. I think this is solid in limited. It's going to be like amazing and constructed as a 1-drop for aggressive white decks. Here, it's just solid. It gives you some pretty good disruption, and I love that they made sure it even nerfs lands. Sometimes attacks won't matter much, and obviously you don't choose the card, your opponent does, which makes it a lot less impressive as your opponent gets to choose something that impacts them the least. But you do get a pretty good return on only 1 mana here. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Lumen-class Frigate, which for 1 generic and a white is a rare artifact spacecraft, and like all the spacecraft, it comes with Station, and that means you can tap another creature you control to put charge counters equal to that creature's power on this spacecraft. Station only as a sorcery, and then depending on the number of charge counters on this, you get other effects. In this case, with 2 or more, other creatures you control get +1/+1, and with 12 or more, it becomes a 3/5 with flying and lifelink. I think you'll frequently be able to put 2 charge counters on this the turn it comes down, and that not only means your board gets significantly better for a reasonable cost, it also means that stationing this becomes a lot easier because it's buffing your creatures, making them more capable of putting more charge counters on this. It does still take some time to become a creature in most cases, but a 2-mana Anthem is a card you play anyway, and this one can start contributing damage and gaining you life, so it's going to be awesome upside on a card that's already delivering some pretty real value. I'm giving it a B+. Next up, it's Lux Knight Breacher, which for 3 generic and a white is a 2/2 human knight at common. It enters with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other creature and or artifact you control. This card has a terrible floor, since it's awful when you don't have anything or much going on. Even just 1 counter on this is a bad card, and even 2 isn't something to write home about. There is a high-ish ceiling, but it's still just a big vanilla creature in an ideal world, so it doesn't seem worth the risk to me when the reward is so unexciting. You'll probably play it when you need a 4-drop and you have lots of creatures and artifacts, but you're going to end up cutting this a lot too. I'm giving it a D. Next up, it's Pinnacle Starcage, which for 1 generic and 2 white is a rare artifact. When it enters, you exile all artifacts and creatures with mana value 2 or less until this artifact leaves the battlefield, and you can pay 6 generic and 2 white to put each card exiled with this artifact into its owner's graveyard, then create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token for each card that was put into a graveyard this way, and then you sacrifice the Pinnacle Star Cage. So this is symmetrical, so sometimes it'll be tricky making it hurt your opponent more than it hurts you, since most decks run cards that cost 2 or less mana, and the other ability is expensive enough that I don't think you're counting on it reliably being a way to break the symmetry. Plus, in many situations, you're not going to exile that many things, so you won't get that many robots anyway. This feels like a very awkward D in your main deck, but against a deck that is super low to the ground and or one that has lots of tokens, this does get more interesting, so it's an okay sideboard card, probably a C+ against the right opponent. Next up, it's Pulsar Squadron Ace, which for 1 generic and a white is a 1/2 human pilot at uncommon. When it enters, you look at the top 5 of your library. You can reveal a spacecraft card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you didn't put a card into your hand this way, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. This is good. It's either a 2 mana 1/2 that draws you a card or a 2 mana 2/3 that helps with +1/+1 counter synergy. I'm pretty happy with either outcome, especially on turn 2. I'm giving this a B-. Next up, it's Radiant Strike, which for 3 generic and a white is a common instant. Destroy target artifact or tapped creature, you gain 3 life. So note that this can destroy any artifacts, not just tapped ones. This is a kind of card where it's easy to misread that because it can only destroy tapped creatures. But anyway, 4 mana for this effect is kind of a lot when it's somewhat narrow, but the life it gains you makes up for that in a significant way, and many people may be tapping their creatures a lot in this set because of the station mechanic. Destroying something your opponent worked really hard to station also sounds pretty sweet for tempo in general in this format. This does fall below premium to me because of the cost, but I think it's a C+. Next up, it's Rayblade Trooper, which for 2 generic and a white is a 2/2 human soldier at uncommon. When it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and whenever a non-token creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and it has warp for 1 generic and a white. So, Grey Ogre stats, as always, are pretty brutal, but this has a good interest trigger that you might get access to twice, and that, of course, sets it up so that you can get tokens more easily, too. There are other ways to do stuff with counters in this set, too, especially in the green-white color pair, and we've seen a lot of them in white as well, so I think this is actually pretty good, giving it a B-. Next up, it's Reroute Systems, which for 1 white mana is an uncommon instant that says choose one, target artifact or creature gains indestructible until end of turn, or Reroute Systems deals 2 damage to target tapped creature. I like the look of this. 1 mana for indestructibility is a nice way to blink most removal spells, and it occasionally works as a combat trick, and the removal mode will be useful sometimes too, and when it is, it'll often be able to trade up. Sure, both modes are kind of restrictive, but having both of them on a card that only costs 1 mana is pretty nice, giving this a C+. Next up, it's Rescue Skiff, which for 5 generic and a white is an uncommon artifact spacecraft. When it enters, you return target creature or enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and if it has 10 or more charge counters, it's a 5/6 flyer. So I like this. It'll add somebody to the battlefield up front, and that means having something that may help this turn into a creature more quickly. With all of these, you have to account for fail cases when you just never turn them into creatures, and while 6 mana to reanimate something from your graveyard isn't amazing, it's a passable fail case that will get you something almost every time it enters. And if you ever turn this into a big flyer, your opponent's really going to be in trouble. I think this is a B-. Next up, it's Scout for Survivors, which for 2 generic and a white is an uncommon sorcery. It says return up to 3 target creature cards with total mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. So these really cheap white reanimate effects are rarely good and limited. They're just too narrow because they can only bring back really specific things, and you need things in your graveyard to begin with. This one does have me a little intrigued, since you can potentially reanimate multiple things, and that might even be preferable, since they get counters, but even reanimating just a 3-drop with this doesn't seem terrible. You just have to account for the times where you don't have a target, and those are unfortunately fairly common. I think that holds it to a C. Next up, it's Seam Rip, which for 1 white mana is an uncommon enchantment, and when it enters, you exile target non-land permanent opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. So Portable Hole was a solid limited card, and this is an enchantment version. It would definitely be better in this set if it was an artifact, but it still does the job. It's narrow, but you can often spend 1 mana to exile 2 mana things, and that is trading up. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's the Seriema, which for 1 generic and 2 white is a rare legendary artifact spacecraft, and when it enters, you search your library for a legendary creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And if it gets 7 or more charge counters on it, it becomes a 5/5 flyer, and other tapped legendary creatures you control have indestructible. So this set has fewer legendary creatures in it than we've seen in a while. For example, not all the Signpost uncommons are legendary creatures. So the number of legendary creatures we actually have at lower rarities is actually pretty limited, and I think that really hurts the Seriema. If this was in Final Fantasy, for example, it would have been way better because most decks just have like 4 legendary creatures that can be tutored up. But in this format, you'll be lucky to have 2. As such, I think this is probably just a D, since it won't deliver much value initially, and it won't be that great once it becomes a creature either. Next up, it's Squire's Lightblade, which for 1 white mana is a common artifact equipment with flash. When it enters, attach it to target creature you control. That creature gains first strike until end of turn. The equipped creature gets +1/+0, and this can equip for 3 generic. So we just saw Coral Sword be an okay card, and this is pretty much the same card, but actually worse, because the equip cost is 2 mana higher. Now, this does work nicely for decks trying to cast multiple spells because it's so cheap, and it's also an artifact, which matters. But I can't help but think this card won't really give you the card of value you want most of the time. The idea is to use it as a trick and win combat with it, but this buff just doesn't do that good of a job. And then the buff that's left over also is pretty insignificant, especially when it costs 3 mana to move it around. So I think this is a D+. Next up, it's Starfield Shepherd, which for 3 generic and 2 white is a 3/2 angel at uncommon. It's got flying. When it enters, you search your library for a basic plains card or a creature card with mana value 1 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle, and it does warp for 1 generic and a white. I really like this. Warping it is good value that lets you hit a land drop, and casting it later still nets you another card, whether you grab a land or a 1-drop. It's actually sort of reminiscent of Call the Mountain Chocobo, only you don't add to the board right away with this. Not permanently, anyway. Still, this is lots of value on 1 card. I'm giving it a B. Next up, it's Starfighter Pilot, which for 1 generic and a white is a 2/2 human pilot at common. When it becomes tapped, you surveil 1. 2 mana 2/2s are pretty bad these days. They need some real upside to really overcome that, and this one doesn't really get there. Sure, you're going to tap it to surveil sometimes, especially when you have spacecraft and maybe it attacks early and lets you surveil before trading, but none of that's very exciting. I think it's just a D+. Next up, it's Starport Security, which for 1 white mana is a 1/1 artifact creature robot soldier at common. You can pay 3 generic and a white and tap it to tap another creature, but it costs 2 less to activate if you control a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. Man, this tap ability used to be so good and limited in the olden days where most of creatures' value were in their ability to attack or block, but limited has changed a lot, and we haven't seen one of these tap abilities perform very well in a long time. And I don't see this one being any different, especially when you're paying 4 for it. It's absolutely horrendous. When you're only spending 2 on it, which is doable in a deck like Green-White, it does get better. But a lot of the time, you'd much rather be using your mana for effects that have a more permanent impact on the board than you would on a card like this. I just think it's a D. Next up, it's Sunstar Chaplain, which for 1 generic and a white is a 3/2 human cleric at rare. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and you can pay 2 generic and remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control to tap target artifact or creature. So this isn't always going to give you counters, but even getting 1 out of this will feel like an amazing deal, and it's certainly possible to get more. This can definitely allow you to snowball in the early game if you're able to just curve out and keep swinging, and the tap mode can be useful all game long. I'm giving this a B. Next up, it's Sunstar Expansionist, which for 1 generic and a white is a 2/3 human knight at uncommon, and when it enters, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you create a lander token, and it has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, this creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So this has good stats, and when you get that enters trigger, it's going to feel pretty insane. Like, if this was always a 2 mana 2/3 that made a lander when it entered, I'd be pretty close to giving it like an A-, because that's just so much value from 1 card. We also just saw in Final Fantasy that the +1/+0 landfall trigger is surprisingly effective. So this looks like a pretty strong uncommon to me. I'm giving it a B. Next up, it's Sunstar Lightsmith, which for 3 generic and a white is a 3/3 human artificer at uncommon. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and draw a card. So this payoff for double spelling is sweet, but pretty much every time we see a 4 mana 3/3 that grows when X happens, it ends up being pretty mediocre and limited. The base stats are just so bad, and even in a deck geared towards second spells, you won't trigger this enough for it to feel great. Drawing a card does make this really strong, and makes it stronger than most versions of this effect we've seen before, but I'm still not super high on this. You know, playing this on 4 and then your opponent can still attack you with all of their creatures with no problem at all feels pretty miserable. And that's going to be what happens a lot of the time. It's going to be a really underwhelming creature for at least one full turn and often longer than that. So I think it's a C. Next up, it's Wedgelight Rammer, which for 3 generic and a white is an uncommon artifact spacecraft, and when it enters, you create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token, and if you get 9 or more charge counters on it, it's a 3/4 with flying and first strike. I love that this gives you a body up front, and the body even enters untapped, so you can use it right away to put a couple charge counters on this, and once it gets to 9, it has a body that's relevant all game long. Also, it gives you 2 artifacts, which really matters in white, so I'm giving this a B-. Next up, it's Weft Blade Enhancer, which for 5 generic and a white is a 3/4 Drix Artificer at common. When it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, and it has Warp for 2 generic and a white. Warping this early and getting a couple of counters will feel okay, and that's good because if this were only the 6 mana mode, it wouldn't be very good. It has bad base stats, and sure, it can put a counter on itself, but the other one has to go somewhere else. It's never really going to feel very efficient when you cast it for 6, but when you factor in warping it and then casting it for 6 later and getting 4 counters out of 1 card, it sounds a lot better, but it still feels pretty underwhelming to me because of the cost of both modes, so I think it's a C-. And our last white card is Zealous Display, which for 2 generic and a white is a common instant, and creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. If it's not your turn, untap those creatures. While the untap part is an upgrade over most versions of this effect, it's a pretty minimal one. You only use this kind of card like that in an absolute emergency, since the lack of a toughness boost probably doesn't do you that many favors when you're the one who's blocking. This is still far better when you're attacking, and still only useful in the most narrow of decks that are insanely aggressive. I'm giving it a D+. Alright, so those are all the white cards in Edge of Eternities. In the next video, I'll look at all the blue ones. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch the rest of the set review, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the set review videos that are already out, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.